Hi, I'm Kayla. At my college graduation, I was glowing until I heard it. Who let the black doorman in? They were talking about my stepfather, the man who raised me, who gave up everything so I could stand on that stage. They sneered, laughed, called him the help, while I stood frozen. And the worst part, my husband's family said nothing. Worse, they laughed too, but 3 months later, the world saw him for what he truly was. And when he took that stage, they didn't dare look away. Before we dive in, what time are you watching this, and where from? Drop it in the comments. We read every one. The night before graduation, I sat on the edge of my bed. The weight of the cap and gown laid out beside me heavier than it should have been. My hands were folded still, but my mind kept circling one name that wasn't on the official invitation list. Malcolm outside my window spring-cycas buzzed in the oak trees, and the smell of mown grass drifted in. It should have been a proud moment. He'd seen me through more than anyone else had. Math tests, heartbreaks, college loans, but his name was imprinted on the parchment invite from the university. Not on the reserved seat list either. I knew why. And I hated myself for not fighting harder. He never said a word about it. That was always his way. Quiet, dependable, dignified, even when dignity was denied. There was a knock on my bedroom door. Verena. My mother slipped in like a ghost in her pressed linen blouse. The scent of her expensive lavender lotion filling the room. They confirmed the seats. She said, not looking at me, front row next to Leonard and Grace for total. I didn't answer. She sat on the vanity stool crossing her legs, smoothing the hem of her pants with a kind of forced elegance. You know how his presence might make them uncomfortable. It's their name on the endowment. I turned to face her. He raised me. She sighed the way mothers do when they want to make you feel dramatic. Kayla, honey, this isn't the time to make a statement. Just get your diploma and smile for the photos. Let's not start a war over seating charts. Outside the room, I heard the familiar sound of Liam's socked footsteps approaching. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded across his chest. His eyes avoided mine. She has a point, he mumbled. Let's just keep the peace. Peace for who? I asked, sharper than I intended. No one answered. They left the room quietly. Liam rubbed my shoulder before he went. Soft, apologetic, useless. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of the first night Malcolm came into my life. I was 7. I'd been sick with strep, burning with fever. My real dad was already gone by then. Verena had brought Malcolm home just 2 weeks earlier. I remember curling into the corner of the couch, shivering and crying when he walked in, with a warm towel and a cup of tea. Can I sit? He'd asked, not like a stranger, but not like he assumed he had a right. I nodded. He sat beside me, handed me the tea, and pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. He stayed there the whole night. Read me stories, whispered silly jokes, checked my temperature every hour. You're my girl now, he said sometime after midnight, when I'd finally stopped crying. And I believed him. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as I slipped on my graduation dress, a pale blue silk wrap that Malcolm had helped me pick out weeks ago. I walked into the kitchen to grab coffee and found him already dressed, pressed khakis, polished shoes, and his old security jacket from the high school he used to work at. Didn't think you'd be up this early, I said, smiling. He held out the coffee pot like a butler in a comedy skit. Big day. He didn't mention the seating. He never did. As I stood in front of the mirror trying to zip the gown over my shoulders, he stepped in behind me. Let me help, he said, his voice soft. His hands shook just slightly. When he finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief folded neatly into the shape of a small crane. He slipped it into my purse without a word. What's this? In case you forget how to fly, he said. I couldn't speak. I just hugged him tight fast before the moment dissolved. We drove separately to the ceremony. Liam insisted I ride with his parents. Make the proper entrance look the part. Malcolm understood. He always understood. The university grounds buzzed with excitement. Families cheered, balloons floated. And somewhere across the quad, a brass band played a slightly off-key version of Pomp and Circumstance. I walked with Liam and his parents to the front row section marked donors and families. The seats were cordoned off with velvet rope, shiny like something sacred grace. My mother-in-law wore her usual icy pearls and stiff smile. Leonard had on his signature blazer, with the family crest pinned to the lapel. As I took my seat, I looked back past the crowd, past the graduates milling about, to the man standing by the stadium's side gate, Malcolm. He stood tall in his uniform, hands clasped behind his back. No ticket, no seat, just there watching Grace, leaned toward Leonard and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "The black doorman's here. Does she really think that's her family?" My stomach turned. Leonard chuckled under his breath. "Well, I suppose everyone has a past." I turned my face forward, didn't flinch, didn't cry, but I reached into my purse, my fingers wrapped around the soft folds of that paper crane. Malcolm had seen me, every version of me, not just the one in this gown. And as they called out the names, I kept my fingers closed around that folded fabric I didn't let go. I didn't cry, not yet, but I felt something inside me begin to shift. The handkerchief Malcolm had given me sat tightly balled in my palm. The edges crumpled from my grip. I could still feel the faint folds of the paper crane he'd made out of it. Delicate and defiant at once, the kind of thing a little girl would treasure. But I wasn't a little girl anymore. I was a woman with a husband beside me, who wouldn't meet my eyes, and a mother 2 rows back, pretending not to notice the flush in her cheeks. The ceremony was already underway. A breeze rustled through the magnolia, sending soft shadows across the stage, where the dean stood smiling with practiced ease. Rows of white folding chairs filled the wide lawn in front of him, dotted with families in pastel dresses, navy blazers, and straw hats. My husband's mother, Grace, pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and leaned toward Leonard with a whisper I caught in fragments. Something about another tacky handbag someone was carrying. I didn't respond. My eyes drifted back to the edge of the crowd, where Malcolm stood in his pressed navy blue security uniform. He kept a respectful distance, his posture ramrod straight, his eyes scanning the perimeter like it was just another job. But I saw his fingers twitch slightly at his side. I knew that twitch. It meant he'd heard them. Dean Halbert tapped the microphone, drawing the audience's attention back to the stage. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began warmly. "Today we celebrate not only achievement, but character, perseverance, the spirit of service. But before we continue with our program, we'd like to take a brief moment to honor someone who represents those values." I sat up straighter. My in-laws barely glanced at the podium, too distracted by gossip and sunlayer. Liam fiddled with his wedding ring, but me, I felt a sudden rush of heat to my chest. The dean continued, "Among us today is someone whose life exemplifies sacrifice and courage. A man who under enemy fire led the evacuation of 17 wounded soldiers from Kandahar and lived to tell the tale." My breath caught. Grace froze, her lips pursing into a thin line. "Please don't let it be him," she hissed to Leonard. But it was. I knew it before the name came. "Mr. Malcolm Jones," the dean said, voice firm and proud. "Would you please come forward?" At first no one moved. Then a low murmur swept through the crowd like a wave. Guests craned their necks. Some clapped hesitantly. Others looked around, confused. A few stood. I turned and saw Malcolm still at the edge of the lawn, motionless. His shoulders rose once, just slightly. Then he began walking. His pace was even, but I saw the tremble in his step. He moved like a man used to being invisible, suddenly pulled into focus. His boots met the grass with weight. Grace let out a sharp breath like someone had smacked her. "They must have made a mistake," she muttered. "There's no way." Liam said nothing. He couldn't. I watched Malcolm climb the short stage steps slowly. Not because he was hesitant, but because he was deliberate, measured like every second counted. When he reached the dean, the 2 men shook hands. "This," said Dean Halbert, turning to the audience, "is a man who embodies what our graduates should aspire to be. Discipline, integrity, humility. Mr. Jones, on behalf of the university, we present you with the honorary guardian of the class medallion." He pinned the round gold medallion to Malcolm's chest just above the seam of his uniform pocket. Malcolm gave a small nod, No speech, no wave, just a single respectful dip of the head. And then the strangest thing happened. People stood a few at first, then more, then all at once. The lawn was filled with applause, a standing ovation. The sound was deafening, and yet all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. My stepfather, this man who fixed my brakes in the middle of winter, who drove 3 hours to pick me up after a bad breakup, who made pancakes in the shape of elephants when I was too sad to eat, was standing tall on that stage, while the very people who tried to erase him couldn't deny him. Now I looked to my left. Grace had gone pale. Leonard blinked slowly, stunned. Liam had his hands folded in his lap, unmoving. None of them clapped. I wanted to lean in and say, "See him now," but I didn't. Instead, I gripped that little crane in my hand tighter. As Malcolm stepped down from the stage and made his way back to the edge of the crowd, I finally exhaled. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The applause faded, but the moment didn't, because in that second I saw something shift. Not just in the crowd, but in myself. He didn't need their seat or their approval. He had his own place now, one they couldn't take. But when I turned around, I saw Grace's face, and I knew this wasn't over. Her cheeks were tight, nostrils flared, and her pearls sat crooked on her collarbone, as if even they had recoiled in embarrassment. She wasn't clapping, she wasn't even pretending. While everyone else swarmed Malcolm with handshakes and words like hero and honor, Grace turned on her heel, gripped Leonard's sleeve, and disappeared into a white tent tucked behind the rose trellis. Liam reached for my arm, his voice low, overly casual. "You good?" I pulled away gently. "I'll be right back, Kayla," he started, but I was already walking. The sun had begun to soften, casting warm gold across the lawn. Applause still echoed behind me, fading as I passed the catering tables and the clinking of celebratory glasses. I moved quickly, not because I wanted to fight, but because I knew one was coming. Inside the tent, the air was cooler, the light diffused, and there she was. Grace pacing like a general just off the battlefield wineglass. In hand, her mouth drawn into a sharp line, Leonard sat near the back, sipping champagne as if it were tap water. Grace spun around when she saw me. "You planned this, didn't you?" I stood still. Planned what? Her voice sharpened. "Don't insult my intelligence. That stunt out there. Malcolm being trotted out like some war trophy, that was you." My heart thudded, but I kept my voice even. "You mean the truth." Grace stepped closer. "You made us look like fools." I tilted my head. "Did I? Or did the truth just finally speak louder than your money?" Leonard cleared his throat barely, lifting his gaze. "We were trying to cultivate a refined image for the family, for Liam's career." I turned to him. "So refined means what now? Erasing people who don't fit your mold?" Grace gasped, scandalized. "How dare you?" I wasn't raising my voice, but every word landed like a gavel. "Let me get this straight. You can ignore Malcolm, insult me, sneer at where I came from. But the moment someone else acknowledges the man who practically raised me, suddenly it's sabotage." Grace pointed a trembling finger. "You're out of line." I crossed my arms, "And you're out of excuses." She stepped closer. "Don't think this won't have consequences. Your marriage, it's already on shaky ground." I blinked. "You're threatening your own son's marriage because my stepfather was honored." Grace's lips curled. "Liam has options, Kayla. You're not the only woman who's ever." "That's enough," I cut in sharp. "You don't get to rewrite this day just because you weren't the center of it." Leonard swirled his champagne lazily. "No one was rewriting. We simply didn't want any complications." Just then the flap of the tent rustled and Malcolm stepped in. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, his posture calm, his eyes steady. The metal on his chest caught the light. Grace froze. Malcolm looked at her, then at Leonard, and finally at me. "I once stood in Kandahar," he said slowly, with bullets cutting through the air, dragging men twice my size over rubble. "And I didn't flinch." His voice cracked slightly. "But today, when I saw you look at me like I was dirt, I did." He gave Grace a single nod. respectful but final, then turned and walked out. Silence dropped like a curtain. Then Grace let out a strangled sound and hurled her wineglass at the floor. It shattered red, spreading across the white cloth like blood. "That man is not family," she hissed. I looked her straight in the eye. "Then maybe neither am I." I didn't wait for an answer as I pushed the flap aside and stepped out into the fading daylight. The noise of the celebration washed back over me like a wave. I just stepped out from under. I could hear someone laughing near the dessert table. Someone else asking Malcolm for a photo. Grace's muffled shouting faded behind me. I walked forward. That night, the hum of the car was the only thing filling the silence between us. Liam kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white around the steering wheel. The streetlights flickered across his face in intervals. Light shadow light. I sat in the passenger seat, hands folded tightly in my lap. Jaw locked, trying not to cry. The glow from the ceremony had faded the second we stepped off campus. Gone was the applause, the warmth, the look in Malcolm's eyes when he stood tall on that podium. All that was left now was a quiet tension pressing on my chest like a stone. We pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex just past 10. Liam didn't move right away. He turned off the ignition but didn't look at me. Still not looking, he finally spoke. "You knew he was going to get honored, didn't you?" I blinked. What he exhaled through his nose. "Malcolm, you knew he was getting that medal. You didn't tell me." I turned to face him. "You're angry because I didn't ruin a surprise honor for the man who practically raised me." He laughed, but it was short and cold. "You used today to make my family look small." I stared at him in disbelief. "You think I planned all this to embarrass your mother?" He got out without answering. I followed him up the steps. The hallway light buzzed overhead, and I realized I was shaking. I couldn't tell if it was from the chill in the air or the rage building in my chest. Inside the apartment, I tossed my clutch on the entryway table and turned to him. They called him a doorman. Liam in front of dozens of people. They said he didn't belong. Liam kicked off his shoes and walked toward the kitchen. "They didn't mean it like that." I followed him. "Then how did they mean it? Please enlighten me." He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and leaned against the counter. My mom was caught off guard. You know how she is with image. "Oh, I know," I snapped. "She's all about image. As long as that image is white, wealthy, and exactly the version of the world she wants to believe in." He looked at me then sharply. "Stop it, Kayla." "No," I said, voice rising. "You stop it." You stood there and said nothing when they insulted Malcolm, the man who took me in when I had nothing, who raised me like his own. Liam shook his head. "It's not about that." "Then what is it about, Liam?" He set the beer down without drinking it. "It's about the fact that you let my family walk into that room unprepared. You let them make fools of themselves." "Your mother made a fool of herself," I said evenly. "No one else." He didn't respond. He just looked at me, his jaw tight again. Then he said it. "Look, if you want this to work us, you need to help smooth things over. Talk to my parents. Apologize if you have to." My blood went cold. "Excuse me," he crossed his arms. "You heard me." I stepped back, suddenly aware of how far apart we'd grown, and how quickly. "You're asking me to fix the mess your family made." "I'm asking you to be smart," he said, "to think about the bigger picture." "No, you're asking me to betray myself." He stared at me, silent. I pushed again. "And if I don't," there was a pause. "Then this our marriage, it's not going to survive." I laughed, but it came out like a breathless cough. "So that's it. A line in the sand. You can't keep fighting everyone," he said softly. "I wasn't fighting anyone." I whispered. I was honoring someone I couldn't breathe. I walked past him into the living room and sank onto the couch. My hands trembled in my lap. Across the room, the clock ticked louder than it should have. My phone buzzed on the end table. I picked it up and saw Malcolm's name. A voicemail. I pressed play, holding it to my ear. "Kayla." His voice was warm, tired. "I saw how you stood up today. I saw the fire in you, and I want you to know I'm proud of you. You didn't flinch. Not once." My eyes welled up before the message ended. It was strange hearing that after everything, after being told, I had to apologize for protecting him. I sat in the dark for a long time. Eventually, I looked down at my wedding ring. The silver band felt heavy tonight, like it knew something I didn't want to admit. I turned toward the hallway. The bedroom door was closed. Liam had gone in there without a word. And that's when I heard it, my own voice in my head. What if strength means walking away? I didn't rush toward an answer. I just let the question settle into the air where it belonged. I reached for my phone again, opened my email app, and that's when I made a decision that would change everything, even if it meant losing Liam. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I stared at the ceiling, blinking into the dark, while Liam slept in the guest room. Door closed. His side of the bed stayed untouched. By morning, I got up, brushed my teeth like muscle memory, and sat down at my desk, hair still, damp from the shower. There was no drama, no music swelling in the background, just the quiet tap of keys under my fingers. The email wasn't long, but every word weighed something. Dear Dean Harper, thank you for what you said at the ceremony. It meant more than you know. Would you be open to a coffee meeting? There's something I'd love to discuss, something meaningful. I read it again, then again. Not because I doubted it, but because I knew this would be the first step forward. Not just for me, but for the man they mocked. The man who once sold the thing he loved most, just so I could take a test. I was 15. Malcolm had just come home from a shift at the hotel, smelling faintly of sweat and those little mints they leave on pillows. I found him in the living room, kneeling over an old wooden case. His saxophone. I froze. What you doing? I asked. He smiled at me. Not the big grin, but that small, tired curve that said more than he ever admitted. They bumped your sat class up, huh? I nodded. I said I'd figure it out. He looked down at the instrument. You already did. He didn't ask. He didn't make a speech. He didn't act like a hero. He just handed over the case to a man, waiting outside, shook his hand, then walked back inside, like it was nothing. Later that night, he joked over dinner. Can't play jazz without fingers as fast as yours anyway. I knew what he gave up, but he never made me feel guilty. He just believed that memory stayed with me as I opened a new email draft. This one wasn't for an opportunity. It wasn't soft. It wasn't forgiving. It was for Liam's parents. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Winslow. This isn't an apology. I want to be clear. Your words at graduation. What you said about Malcolm weren't misunderstood. They were disrespectful. Dressed up in tradition doesn't make it acceptable. Malcolm is my father. Not by biology, but by every real measure that matters. I won't be attending another dinner where he's spoken of as less than. That's not up for debate. I reread it once, then hit send. No shaking hands, no cold sweat, just stillness, and finally a kind of breath I hadn't taken in weeks. I left the apartment that afternoon to get groceries. I wanted to do something normal, something grounded. The air outside was brisk, June clinging to spring's chill. I walked slower than usual. Head clearer, I picked up spinach, eggs, and coffee, things that kept me tied to real life. By the time I got home, Liam's name flashed on my phone before I could even put the bags down. I hesitated. Then answered. You emailed them, he said. No greeting, just those 3 words, tight angry, like he hadn't slept either. I did. Why? Because shouting across the dinner table never worked. They needed to hear me without noise. They're hurt, they're exposed, I said flatly. There's a difference. He was silent for a second, then said, You made this worse. I stepped into the kitchen and opened the fridge. No, I made it honest. There was another silence. Not the kind where someone searches for the right words, more like the kind when someone realizes the old rules don't apply anymore. You can't undo it, he finally said. I don't want to. I hung up first. The silence after that call didn't ache the way it used to. It felt earned. I turned on the kettle, poured myself a mug of tea, and sat by the window. My inbox was still open on the laptop. One new email from Dean Harper. Subject, Ray. Thank you. I clicked Kayla. Your message moved me. And actually, there's something I've been meaning to offer you. Can we talk soon? Best, Dean. My pulse jumped. It was polite, simple, but every word thudded with possibility. Something he's been meaning to offer, a job, a program, a partnership. I blinked and read it again. Maybe this wasn't just about defending Malcolm. Maybe it was finally about building something on my own terms. My chest tightened in the best way. Not fear, but that sense that something was about to begin. I closed the laptop gently and stared out at the street. The next chapter wasn't just mine, it was ours. The morning light filtered softly through my window as I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the collar of my blouse. I'd worn this one before, a simple soft blue. But today it felt different, like I was stepping into something I hadn't dared to claim. Before I ran a hand over the small fray at the sleeve, but didn't bother changing. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was dressing to own it. The university boardroom was older than any building I'd studied in thick wood paneling. Lined the walls, and the air held a quiet authority. Like centuries of decisions had soaked into the grain, my heels clicked lightly against the polished floor as I entered. Dean Harper stood near the far end of the room in front of a wide window that overlooked the quad. Sunlight lit the frame behind him, but his face as always was all warmth. "Kayla," he said, nodding, "you made it." "Wouldn't miss it." He smiled, then stepped aside, revealing a woman I hadn't met before. She was elegant silver hair, pulled back in a low twist, her suit sharp but approachable. She extended a hand with quiet confidence. "Kayla Ward, meet Provost Dana Mallister. Dean Harper said she's been eager to speak with you." "It's a pleasure," she said. Her grip firm, I smiled, trying to steal the tiny quake in my chest. "Please," she gestured toward the table. "Sit with us." We settled into the deep leather chairs, and I folded my hands, feeling 20 different versions of nervous. But I kept my chin up, that version of me who used to shrink into corners. She wasn't here today. "Kayla," the prost began, "I've had the chance to review your thesis. Not just read it, but truly study it. You're writing on the intersection of art, community, trauma, and policy. It's not just theory, it's a call to action." I blinked, unsure how to respond. She continued. "We've been developing a new initiative, a pilot program aimed at integrating creative practice into civic education, and we'd like to offer you a full postgraduate research grant, completely funded." I swallowed, unsure if I'd heard her right. "But you mean I'd participate?" She smiled. "You'd lead it. The pilot would operate under your name. You'd be chairing the program." My mouth opened, then closed. I felt the word land chair, as if someone had finally invited me not just into the room, but to the head of the table. "You believe I'm ready to lead something like that?" Dean Harper jumped in. "You've already been leading. We're just making it official." My heart was pounding in my ears. I thought of my mother, how she'd always said, "We didn't raise you to be louder than your place." And my stepfather, who once told Malcolm, "You're raising a mouth, not a daughter." And now I was being offered the very thing they claimed I'd never deserve. "And one more thing," Dean Harper added, his tone softer now. "We're planning our civic leadership event this summer, and we'd like to recognize someone." He paused, and I already knew. Malcolm Ward. His decades of service, mentorship, and quiet sacrifice deserve honor. I felt it before I could stop it. A rush of tears pushing against my eyes, I blinked fast, trying not to let them fall. "He doesn't really know how to accept praise," I said, my voice low. "He spent his whole life holding others up." Then maybe Dean Harper replied, "It's time someone held him up for a change." I looked away for a second, needing the space to breathe through the wave of emotion. After the meeting, I stepped outside onto the steps near the quad. The breeze was gentle, and the students around me moved like they were still half in summer. I pulled out my phone to call Malcolm to tell him everything, but a text had just come through. It was from Liam. "You've changed. You think you're better now." I stared at the screen for a while, thumb hovering. My chest tightened, but not in the old anxious way. More like disappointment wrapped in clarity. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because I no longer needed his permission to be proud of who I was becoming. Instead, I slipped the phone back in my purse and walked back inside to gather my folder and water bottle. As I re-entered the boardroom, the chairs were already being tucked and the papers stacked. But something caught my eye at the center of the table, a small wooden block. Real wood mahogany, maybe, and on it a metal nameplate. I stepped closer. It read, "Kayla Ward Program Chair." The engraving was clean, the lettering bold, not taped on, not printed permanent. For a moment, I couldn't move. My fingers hovered above it, then gently traced the edges of each letter. My name in a place of authority. My identity not diluted, not hyphenated, not softened to make others feel comfortable. Kayla Ward Chair, I thought of Malcolm again. Of that day he pawned his saxophone and smiled like it hadn't cost him anything. Of every silent ride he gave me to night classes, every lunch he packed, every insult he swallowed so I wouldn't have to hear it. This wasn't just my chair. It was his too. I pressed my palm flat against the table, holding the moment in place. No applause, no spotlight, just wood metal and the truth of who I was becoming. And then just before I turned to leave, something shifted inside me. A quiet strength. Not loud, not defiant, just grounded. The real moment I broke. It wasn't the chair. It was what my stepfather whispered when he saw it. The chair with my name on it still hadn't sunk in. I kept brushing my fingers over the brass plate, like I was waiting for it to smudge or fade. It didn't. But what cracked me wide open wasn't the applause or the plaque. It was what Malcolm leaned in and whispered as we stepped off that stage. Your mom told me not to come, said I'd ruin your big moment. We stood just behind the velvet curtain, the soft glow of the chandelier bleeding in from the ballroom. My breath caught, I turned and searched his eyes. But he wasn't angry, just tired, resigned. You knew he gave a quiet nod. I came anyway, I always will. And then someone called my name from the floor manager's clipboard. And just like that, the moment was swept up in logistics and seating charts, but inside me it stayed heavy. 3 weeks later, the city's Civic Honors Gala arrived, and I found myself standing at the top of a grand staircase with Malcolm by my side. The room was dressed in silver linen and soft amber lights, the kind of decor that made people speak in half whispers and wear shoes that hurt. Tables were dotted with local philanthropists, council members, professors, and more than a few people who'd once looked right through me like I was invisible. This time, I wasn't sitting at the back near the service door. Dean Harper waved us over to the table near the stage. He stood as we approached Kayla Malcolm. You made it. Malcolm adjusted his collar again, still not sure why I'm here. I gently nudged him. Because you're being honored. That means you sit up front with the rest of the impact makers. He looked unconvinced. Dean Harper chuckled. Mr. Reward, I promise you no one here has done more for this city's underserved communities than you, not even me. We took our seats. The silverware was too shiny, and the water glasses had lemon slices floating like ornaments. A string quartet played near the dais. I could feel Malcolm's discomfort. He kept tugging at his cuffs. They're going to look at me funny, he whispered. They might, I admitted, but not because you don't belong. Because they know they ignored someone who's done more in silence than they've done in spotlights. The dean took the mic after the salad course. His voice, always steady in lecture halls, now carried through the room with the weight of formality. Tonight we recognize a man who never asked for attention. He simply did the work. From midnight repairs at community shelters to tutoring GED students after his shifts. He never asked for thanks, but tonight he gets it. Please join me in honoring Mr. Malcolm Ward. The crowd stood all at once like they'd rehearsed it. I felt my throat tighten. Malcolm stood awkwardly, placing one hand over his chest, the other in a half wave. I could tell he didn't want to go up there, but Dean Harper gave him a soft push and walked with him to the mic. Malcolm adjusted it a few times, then cleared his throat. I didn't prepare anything. I just did what needed to be done. I was trying to keep my family safe. I didn't know that made me a hero. Silence, then applause again louder. I wiped at my eyes. It was the kind of moment that made everything before it feel worth crawling through. We stepped down from the stage together, arm in arm. That's when he told me about the call from my mother. She told him to stay home, said he would embarrass me, said his shoes would squeak, that he'd sit wrong, that his grammar wasn't gala ready. He'd never told me before. And standing there with the spotlight finally fading. He looked almost apologetic, but I shook my head. You were never the problem, he gave me a sad smile. That's kind of you. But I know how people see me. You're not what they see. I said, you're what they needed. They just didn't know it yet. We parted briefly so he could greet the mayor, who amusingly recognized him from food drive photos, and I stepped away for air. A side corridor had been roped off for the press, but no one was using it. I slipped in, leaned against the paneled wall, still playing house. With the help, I froze. Liam's mother hair perfectly set eyes, scanning me like she was checking inventory at a clearance rack. Didn't expect to see you here, I said. Straightening, oh, I'm always invited, she replied, examining her manicure. Unlike your escort. That escort saved more lives this year than your son did in his whole Ivy League tour. She smirked. Malcolm, the maintenance man, still the same. I smiled calmly. Actually, he's now a recipient of 2 humanitarian service awards. And tonight he stood on stage while the whole city clapped. She crossed her arms. You think those medals matter? You think that cleans where he came from? I stepped closer. I don't need to clean it, I'm proud of it. And maybe that's what your son could have learned, if he ever stayed in a relationship long enough to learn anything. She opened her mouth to say something, but just then the PA system echoed across the hall. Please welcome back to the stage program chair, Kayla Ward. I held her gaze for a second longer. You enjoy your evening. Then I walked past her and back onto that stage. Dean Harper stood there smiling. Ladies and gentlemen, our city's newest youth outreach initiative, merging community arts with education reform, will be co-led by none other than Kayla Ward. Gasps rose. Like someone had dropped a tray of glasses, I caught faces in the crowd. People from the university board who once suggested I simplify my thesis. So it could be understood, one of them actually nodded. Another gave a slow, reluctant clap. I took the podium, no paper, no speech. Just this: I grew up thinking I had to earn my seat at every table. But today I know better. I belong wherever change is happening. And if there's no seat for me, I'll build the table myself. Applause again. But I didn't look for it. I looked for Malcolm, just off stage, hands clasped, eyes bright. He gave me a proud nod. I stepped down, then my phone buzzed in my clutch. One new message from my mother, just one line. You think you're better than us now? I didn't respond to the message. Right away I stared at the screen until it dimmed. The text hung in my chest, more than in my phone. You think you're better than us now? I didn't need to think about it. I didn't even need to argue. I just knew where I needed to go. It was late afternoon when I pulled up in front of the house. My mother's house. The one I grew up in, the one I used to dream about running away from. The hedges were wild and untrimmed, spilling out like they were trying to crawl back into the street. Cracks split across the pavement like fault lines. But I parked anyway next to the same mailbox. Malcolm once repaired when I was 13. I sat in the car for a long while. The air was still the kind that presses against your skin, like a silent warning. I could see the window above the kitchen sink, still stained with age, and for a second, I could see him there, Malcolm in an old flannel shirt, hammering a loose picket back into the front fence. I was holding the nails, biting my lip with concentration. He'd glanced over his shoulder and grinned. My mom had watched us through that kitchen window, arms folded. She never said anything, never smiled, just stared. The front door creaked open before I could knock. You've humiliated this family enough. Mom said, no hello, no, how are you? Just those words, flat as ever. I stepped forward. The family humiliated itself. She crossed her arms. You were never meant to turn out like this, throwing your life away, parading that man like a badge, choosing him over your real father's memory. It hit me in the gut. Still I stood firm. You mean the man who hit you, slammed doors, and threw glasses? That father, her lips thinned. She didn't deny it instead. She said quietly, coldly. At least he was white. The words didn't land like a punch. They landed like a stone sinking in a pond. I stared at her, at the woman who raised me, at the woman who could never look Malcolm in the eye, who never said thank you, even after he saved us both from a man who broke more than dishes. So that's it, I whispered. All these years it wasn't about him. It was about his skin. She shrugged as if I'd asked whether she preferred tea or coffee. I didn't raise you to embarrass me in front of people who matter. I stepped further inside the air stale with dust and bitterness. People who matter, you mean people like Liam's family, the ones who smiled to your face and treated your granddaughter like an afterthought. Her silence was a confirmation, and it made me feel even colder than her words. The living room hadn't changed much. Same beige carpet, same old couch. The mantel above the fireplace was cluttered with dusty photo frames. Wedding pictures of her and my father, school portraits of me as a kid. But not one picture of me and Malcolm. Not even the one from graduation, like he'd been erased. I walked over, slowly picked up one frame and turned it over in my hand. You never forgave him for stepping in that night, did you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence in that house was louder than shouting. I opened my bag and pulled out a photo I had folded in an envelope. Malcolm and I standing in front of my college. He had his arm around me, his hand raised in mid-laugh. Both of us squinting in the sun, I gently placed it on the mantel, right between the wedding portrait and my third-grade school photo. Her jaw tightened. I won't let you erase him, I said softly. He raised me. He taught me everything that made this version of me. The version you're so angry about. You think that makes you better than me, she snapped. That you get to rewrite this house, like you're the only one who lived pain here. I turned toward the door. My voice didn't rise. I'm not the hero, but I belong to one. She took a step forward, her voice sharp. Don't you dare walk out of here like you've won. I'm not walking out to win, I said. Hand on the doorknob. I'm walking out because I've already left a long time ago. And I meant that because part of me, maybe the biggest part, had packed up and moved the night I was 15, hiding in the hallway. While Malcolm stood between my mom and my father. No fists, no shouting, just standing quiet and unshakable until the screaming stopped. That night was the first time I saw what strength looked like when it didn't come from fear. I didn't slam the door behind me, didn't need to. The sun had dipped lower by the time I reached my car. Orange spilled across the windshield, making the picture of Malcolm shimmer on my dash. Where I'd left a copy, I sat in the quiet for a minute, letting it all settle. The finality, the ache, the quiet resolve. It didn't feel triumphant, it just felt real. And then my phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Liam, just 2 words. We're done. Those 2 words echoed in my mind, longer than they should have. But by the end of that week, I'd stopped waiting for an apology. And by the end of the month, I stopped replaying the silence that followed. Some doors don't close loudly. They just stop opening 3 months later. I stood backstage beneath a banner that read, Midwest Policy Forum Empowering Generations. I clutched my clipboard tighter than I needed to, pretending to skim the event schedule. The buzz of the crowd seeped through the curtains. Community leaders, educators, students, people who had something to say, and more importantly, something to build. I was hosting the final day of the forum. My name had been on the brochure, tucked between speakers and panelists, but I wasn't looking for my own name. My eyes kept scanning the rows through the side curtain, searching for one chair in particular, just one. The auditorium lights were soft and steady as I stepped out quietly into the central aisle to double-check the seating tags. Most of the seats had already filled with coats, programs, half-finished coffee cups. I moved row by row, straightening the ones that had folded over. Then I saw it, 3rd row, right side. The white card said simply, Reserved Malcolm Ward. I felt a breath catch in my throat. From my blazer pocket, I pulled out the small snapdragon I'd brought with me that morning. Warm yellow, just starting to bloom, I tucked it gently into the corner of the name tag. When I was in school, Malcolm used to hide flowers like this in my lunch bag, sometimes pressed into books, once even taped inside a pencil case. Good luck, kid. He'd scribble on a sticky note. No matter what the world thinks, you're already enough. I walked back to the wings and steadied myself before the podium. My fingers no longer trembled like they used to. I no longer felt the need to shrink into the background. Not today. When the microphone clicked on and the room quieted, I smiled. Not wide, just enough. Good afternoon. My name is Kayla Ward. And before we close today's forum, I'd like to share a short story, a personal one. A murmur of chairs adjusting, a few heads tilted up from their phones. When I was 13, my stepfather worked night shifts at a warehouse so I could attend music school on the weekends. When I was 18, he used what was supposed to be his retirement fund to co-sign a student loan, just so I could go to college without choosing between tuition and food. And when I finally crossed that graduation stage, someone looked at him, this man who had poured every breath into my future. And they asked him, "Are you just the doorman?" I paused. The words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. I didn't answer that day. I didn't know how, but today I do. Today we call him what he's always been, a hero. There wasn't a sound at first, just silence. And then it broke, hands clapping, some people standing, others wiping their cheeks. I blinked once, not because I was crying, but because I wasn't. I stepped back from the podium, heart steady now, and turned slightly toward the third row. The seat was still empty, but then a quiet motion caught my eye. A figure slipping through the side aisle. He moved slower than before, his gait heavier. The old leather jacket hadn't changed, neither had the slight limp. But when his eyes found mine, something in my chest softened. "Malcolm," he gave a small nod. No smile, just one simple silent agreement. "I see you and I'm here." He slid quietly into his seat. A few heads turned. Most didn't notice, but I did. That chair wasn't empty anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed in a warm blur. Panels about education reform, senior engagement, cross-generational mentorship. I spoke here and there, answered questions, moderated discussions. But every time I glanced toward the third row, Malcolm was still there, not in the shadows, not outside with us. Then came the closing ceremony. Dean Harper, the forum's longtime director, stepped up to the stage. He was a tall man with a grandfatherly presence and a voice like worn oak. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the 2 seats center stage. "This event," he said, "has always been about honoring those who open doors quietly, humbly, with no expectation of applause. And this final seat today, it was meant for someone like that." He turned toward the crowd, then locked eyes with Malcolm. "This seat," he repeated, tapping the chair beside mine, "belongs to Malcolm Ward." I felt the air shift, like something invisible had just broken loose. All around us, the crowd turned to see. Malcolm didn't move. At first, just stared, blinking, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. Then slowly he stood one step, then another. The applause began as a soft rustle. Then it grew into something that thundered across the room, echoing against the walls. He didn't wave, didn't bow. He just kept walking toward the chair, toward the light, toward the seat that said, "You belong here." He sat next to me, not behind, not beside with me. I didn't say anything. I just reached over, resting my hand on his. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away, and in that moment the noise didn't matter. The cameras didn't matter. Not even the people we'd left behind, my mother, Liam. They're echoes of who we should have been because we were here together that day. We didn't rewrite history, we reclaimed it. And the man they once mocked for holding doors, he walked through one he built with his daughter beside him. Have you ever had someone believe in you before? The world did tell me in the comments. I read everyone.